Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah, and this is a web series from the Midwest Writing Center. If you are unfamiliar with Write More Light, I'll run over the format with you real quick, and then we will get into the show. Um, Once a week, I do an interview with somebody doing something cool in the arts, and once a week, I give itty bitty lessons on something literary. Um, After that, I give you updates about the Midwest Writing Center, upcoming events, stuff like that, and then we leave you with a writing prompt. Today, I am super excited to have an interview day. Those are those are the highlights of my Write More Light life. And I'll be talking to an old and beloved friend of mine, Connor Folse, who has done pretty much everything, but is as probably as invested in story as I am, in that everything that he does seems to really circle this storytelling element. Today we're going to be talking about role play games specifically, but I have the feeling I'm going to want to come back and talk about movies sometime. Connor, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I yeah, I'm really I feel like oftentimes people expect that I'm talking to friends, but like when I'm actually talking to friends, it's different for me.
Yeah,
Um, but everyone becomes friends. It's not fake.
that's
So first, I just want to start off with like real basics. What does RPG stand for?
RPG stands for role-playing game.
And what does that mean?
Well, it can be formed in a variety of mediums. Usually when people think of RPGs, they either think of tabletop or sometimes video games. The most popularized version of that is Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and really what it comes down to is the opportunity to tell stories and have people embody different characters in different realities. Um, Sometimes fantasy, sometimes sci-fi, sometimes other realms than their own life. Um, and sometimes that's within the context of uh, writing or storytelling or gameplay or game design. It can come through in a lot of different ways, but really it's just about role playing. That's obvious, but just being able to play, to embody different characters and to take on different identities than you normally would.
I really like that you've mentioned taking on different identities, and I want to pick that up in a minute. So I'm mentioning it to keep it in my mind instead of writing with the pen in my hand. Uh, you mentioned D&D, which to my understanding is more or less where things start. I assume people have been doing something similar for a very long time, um, but D&D became the thing, became popular. Um, and I guess I'm gonna tell you my understanding and then ask a question. If I get something wrong, please correct me. Um, in and D&D would be a tabletop role play game, meaning you do it at a table, right?
Yes, well, typically, yeah. I mean, usually it's pen and paper, but there are ways to do it now, like online. There are like various applications that people use to play online, but I mean, it's most known for like sitting around a table with a bunch of different people and having pen and paper and dice.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do a little divergence from my question I was about to ask then. Um, no, I'm not. So, okay, you've got players. They
Yeah.
have the situation has players. The players have characters, and then you have a dungeon or game master. Um, please tell me about the role of the game master.
Yeah. So the Dungeon Master or DM, as it's often referred to, they are basically in charge of creating the space in which the players occupy. So they and the people who make Dungeons and Dragons have different um like lots there's lots of different books that contain different campaigns that players can go on, adventures, quests, etc. And the DM is basically in charge of setting up those adventures and quests and setting the story. They're both a narrator and at the same time they're the rules master and they're kind of like the guide and they sort of um, get things moving. And then the characters are like they present scenarios for the characters, for the players' characters to interact in, and then the characters make decisions based on those scenarios of what to do and where to go, and then things kind of happen from there. So they're sort of, I guess the DM is sort of like the gatekeeper of the experience.
I liked narrator. I feel like that's pretty
Yeah.
accessible. Can you tell me what a campaign is?
Yeah, so campaign is again that can come in a lot of different forms, but it's basically a story that's divided into a series of quests, missions that players go on, take their characters through. Um, to that often it will have like a beginning, middle, and end, but campaigns can span over each typically each D&D session is like I don't know 2 hours or so, and it can span over many sessions that can take many months, many years. I mean, I've played Dungeons and Dragons since I was in middle school, which for me it's like I don't know 25 years or something, which is crazy. And I've been in campaigns that have gone for a couple months to like 3 years. So it just depends on, and oftentimes you do it with friends, but you don't have to. Sometimes it's just random people. Oftentimes game stores will host D&D with their own game master, dungeon masters that people can choose to take part in. And so it just sort of depends on how long everybody wants to stay together, commitment level, all sorts of different factors. But campaigns are typically pretty long, but they can kind of be, there's a lot of ability for the dungeon master to mold them and change their length and be creative with how they approach it.
So as I understand it, you can have as many or as few characters, players as you like, as is available, I guess. Um, so then if like walk me through what it would look like to make a character. And no, first, just that part of the question.
Yeah, I mean, typically there's usually D&D is like 4 to 6 players is ideal. But that's you can really play with however many. Um, and character creation often is done. I mean, it depends on if are we just talking in the context of Dungeons and Dragons or like
Yes. Well,
a lot of
the hmm. We'll use Dungeons and Dragons as our archetype for a
yeah. So
game.
so it's oftentimes there's a player's handbook that each person will have where they'll basically refer to the handbook for rules and also how to create a character. And each person has a sheet, and the sheet has laid out stats for each character. So in Dungeons and Dragons specifically, those stats are divided into strength, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, constitution, and dexterity. And those basically govern your character's ability to do certain things within the game world. So when you create your character, you have a certain number of points to spend on those attributes. You get certain skills. You pick a class and a race based on the fantasy world that you're playing in. And then all those stats and that sheet and those rules and skills all govern what happens within the game and whether your character succeeds at what they want to do or fails. And those successes and failures are decided by rolling dice typically. So there is some element of randomness to decide um, what happens as you go along an adventure, but it's also based on, I mean, you have as, enough control and will to shape your character based on what you want to be good at and change outcomes to, based on how good at your character is at doing certain things.
So, now I'll rewind to the other questions. You mentioned pen and paper. We talked a little bit about video games existing and about tabletop. Can you run me through the difference between or hypothetical or potential differences between tabletop and pen and paper?
Well, you mean, well, tabletop and pen and paper are like the same thing. Like that's like you play tabletop with pen and paper, but but if we're talking in the context of like video games and like applications online, there's not that much difference in how the game is played. Um, like most of the time, dungeon masters will use an app called Roll20 online. There are some others, but that's the main one where there's like pre-laid out maps, and basically it's the same as playing in with pen and paper around a table, but you're all doing it online and everything's more automated. So dice rolls are automated, and like your character sheets are listed on the app. And so that's one way to do it. It's basically just taking all the pen and paper and dice stuff and putting it into the computer and the app, and then like being able to play if you are not really, people use that if they're in a situation where they're playing with friends that are like out of state or they can't meet in person. Or it's a way to still continue a campaign when you're not in the same room with people. Um, but there are also video games that do similar things. So the classic example came out 2 or 3 years ago now, Baldur's Gate 3, for example, which is a video game that is essentially Dungeons and Dragons, the video game. And so there are games, that's the most direct comparison of like a Dungeons and Dragons port into a video game setting. So I guess there's different levels. There's like classic pen paper tabletop. There's the apps like Roll20, and then there's video games like Baldur's Gate, and there's also like tons of other RPG video games that people play that sort of, it's all still embodying the same idea of inhabiting a character in a different world or setting and going through whatever story as that character. But it's there's different mediums where that happens, and sometimes you're doing it by yourself and sometimes you're doing it with other people. It's really just how you want to experience whatever story you're playing.
I imagine though that playing, I don't know, in outside of video game, um, I assume, I think I know that in video games you have a limited set of options
Yeah.
for what you can do next. And I also understand that like based on the choices you make in the video game, the because video games are super smart and video game creators and designers are super smart. Um, was that based on the decisions you make, the decisions you are then able to make later are different. But it's still a finite number of decisions you can make. So if I were playing this game with you, um, I could have a really off the wall idea that would not otherwise be an option. And hypothetically, I could do it.
Yeah, so I mean their video games are, I mean they are getting more and more advanced with how many options and how many different like changes to a story that can happen. And like getting into AI is a whole nother topic, but like the more video games incorporate AI into their systems in the future, in the next 5, 10 years, the more we're going to get closer and closer to having like a full range of possibilities when you play. But the advantage of playing in pen and paper tabletop with people is that you're not limited by anything. You have like the full range of your imagination. You can make any decision you want, and you can approach any situation any way you would imagine doing it. So there's more creativity and more freedom to make choices than you would in like a structured game, like video game, or doing something online. And I think that's why Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs like it have remained popular even during like the modern digital age because people like being able to have a full range of creativity and express themselves without limitation, I think.
I guess I do know. So I don't play games. Just generally speaking, I don't play games. Um, which may be some reason for my stunted imagination, or some explanation for it. But I understand, like at the end of the day, the DM has veto power over your decision making.
Yeah, the DM can basically, if you, as a player, you say what you want to do in a given situation and what choice you want to make. Um, and the DM can say, you do this, but with this, but roll this to check if you succeed, or um, I'm not going to allow that, but you can do this instead. Or like it's basically, it's sort of like the last word on if that's going to fit within the structure of the game rules or the narrative space that they've created. But typically, D&D is pretty freeform in that most DMs I've played with try to allow pretty much anything you want to do as long as it's not like destroying the function of the game or ruining other players' experiences, basically.
Um, I have questions that I don't know, probably no one can answer about character building.
Yeah.
But what really interests me is you've got just some people in a room, presumably all people are different people. Um, and then part of this character creation or character building is um you're going to act like that person. It's not you. Like they may be dexterous and strong and smart, but like you also have a personality. And I know some people do backstories, like work really hard on backstories. Um, so I think that that's really cool and appeals to me. Like I don't it's obviously cool to like like pretend to exist or have this experience in a world that is unlike the one you live in, but um I imagine that there's an amount of freedom to being someone else for 2 hours or whatever. Um, I know a lot of the people I know who love games like being like a giant ditz, like a very large person who is ditzy, um, or like something really odd or silly. And I imagine there are also people who like take it very seriously and like get really like want a very powerful, very smart, very sneaky character. Um, is there etiquette to that?
Mm,
To like meshing well with your group or
yeah, I mean,
talking with your other characters about your plans?
I think there is a little bit of that as far as like being able to
Yeah.
interact with the other people you're playing with and knowing what characters they're playing and understanding where you fit
You don't
in
want to
with.
be the silly guy in the serious group.
Yeah, I mean, although that does happen sometimes, it's not always bad to have like some element of comic relief, but um, there's definitely different types of players or people in the context of Dungeons and Dragons. There are people that take it seriously and focus more on how to, it's what's called min-maxing, so being able to like have the best possible character and maximize your stats and your skills and your abilities for what your class and race is allowed to do within the game world. um, and being able to uh, succeed the most at what you're good at, what your character is good at, whether that's combat or persuasion or perception or whatever. And then there are people that focus more on the lore of the game world and the backstory of their character and how their character fits in to the world and what interactions they might be having with NPCs, which are non-playable characters, that the DM will create or put into the game world to facilitate situations within the campaign, quests, adventures, quest givers, whatever. Um, and so it just depends on what you want to get out of it and what is the most enjoyable or the most interesting to each individual player. And I guess for me, I've done a lot of work um, within the social work field with teens on the autism spectrum, neurodivergent teens, and a lot of what I've done has been uh, do like helping to facilitate various D&D campaigns, role playing games, other things for teens on the spectrum, and I think that's one area where D&D and other role playing games like it can be really helpful because it gives kids who are dealing with various challenges a an outlet to express themselves without feeling judgment. And so I think that's like the advantage that role-playing games have had, and there's been more research that's done over the last decade about how helpful that is and how useful it is for people to sort of and what like the role of play therapy does for various people and based on like dealing with trauma and other things. So it's really another way to express that or have an outlet for those things, just like you would with writing or any other version of storytelling, but it's more interactive. I think it's more imaginative.
I would love to hear more about how it's good for us as people. If you know like more details or science or have anecdotes about how it can help us imagine, relate, develop, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
I mean, a lot of what I have done, it's basically doing role-playing games, but under the guise of social skills groups. So it has helped, particularly like, and at least in my case with the work that I've done, it helps neurodivergent kids and teens build social skills because they're interacting in a setting like they're getting to play a game and they enjoy playing the game and they enjoy um, character creation and interacting in a game world. Um, but secretly, what they're actually doing is learning how to cooperate and build relationships and build trust. And there's like foundational elements of working with other people to achieve goals that they can then transplant into their own life. It's almost like subconscious like behavior of like, oh, now I'm like they don't even realize that they're learning how to make friends and to talk to people in different ways, in ways that they might not have before, because a lot of the kids I've worked with struggle with um, socialization and interacting with other people in their age group. Um, and we all do to a certain degree, but I think there's an element of role playing games specifically that allows them to practice skills they may not have in settings that they feel comfortable doing that in because it's not real life. So they get to be somebody else while they do things that they may not be, um, that they may feel uncomfortable with normally.
That's so awesome. As someone who was once unwittingly a neurodivergent teen, um, this is particularly interesting for my lack of mental flexibility, for lack of better phrasing, I guess. Because I mentioned earlier, I was like, okay, well, I have a hard time with my imagination. And I think having ever in my life been in a situation where having an imagination was like the only job that I had. Not, that I have none. It just has no interest in the fantastic. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Um, that seems particularly useful, of course. Um, cooperation, I think, is something we all probably should have learned like from day one. Like they told us that sharing is important, and then they were like, now go be an individual. Um, so that sounds really, really special. I also, as I understand it, with what little education I have about education, um, engaging with narrative also teaches us, of course, this is like up till age 11-ish, teaches us empathy and like a better cultural competence. So like I see lots of other benefits here for all humans, although, I've only had my own experience as a human.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there is an opportunity in a role-playing context for people to get a better understanding of other people they may not understand as much, people who have different backgrounds, different paths in life, and practice skills in figuring out how to interact with them in ways that they may not have otherwise. Um, and it's also just doing it in like fun and interactive settings, whether that's Dungeons and Dragons or video games or some other role-playing game or even movies or books, whatever. It's an opportunity to like interact with storytelling, and then you learn by one of my favorite things about storytelling and stories is that you learn um, through other people's experiences, you learn more about yourself
Mm.
and you're able to like reflect on your own experiences in ways that you may not have previously. And I think that's particularly helpful uh, in settings like the ones I've worked in with um, neurodivergent kids, just because I feel like that's something they would like a lot of them naturally don't like those are skills that a lot of them naturally don't have, and so it's giving them spaces to like experience that
I was gonna say, or don't have organic outlets to
yeah.
um I'm just getting I don't know, my teacher brain got very excited. Um so recently I interviewed somebody about fan fiction because that's something I actually have no um like I've played a couple of role-playing games a couple times and just annoyed everyone there. Um with my ignorance or pretending I don't have ignorance. Uh but fan fiction is something I've only sort of seen in passing, like on Tumblr or like friends telling me about it, or I'll muse about character motivation and like briefly have an idea about what's going to come next, right? And I realized just now, this is coming back to RPGs, that that RPGs at least have a history of being an outlet for that, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, and I'm fine with being wrong. D&D is a response to Lord of the Rings.
I don't
All right, I'll
specifically
look that up.
I don't remember which one came first. I would imagine that Lord of the Rings was first.
I'm gonna
I
look it
don't
up.
know direct response, but I feel like um I mean, even if it wasn't first, there are plenty of other like fantasy novels and you know worlds that were created way before Dungeons and Dragons, and I think Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs take from those universes and then try to allow people to exist in them, because obviously none of us are ever going to be able to exist in Lord of the Rings or any other setting, but I think some people wish that they could, and so it's a chance. It's basically like the closest you can get to putting yourself in that kind of universe and then trying to see what it feels like to live in that, I guess. But I don't think it's a direct like representation of that exactly, but there are also tons of other RPG
I
settings
mean,
in the
I'm
world.
thinking of it as a lineage, not like. a lineage or a response, not branding or something, not official. Um, but I guess what you're saying is where I wanted to go anyway. Um, which is I know there are a lot of, I don't know, franchises out there that then have a role play game affiliated or that come from them. Do you have any experience with that? Is it like annoying because people want to like really go hard on the rules for okay, the only thing I actually know exists is from a video game, which is a JRPG, and I know that it has a pen and paper RPG. Um, but like people get really into, I want to use the rules for this game that we're playing, and then like other people only have experience with, say, Pathfinder. I know a game that exists.
Very simple.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any experience with like specific franchise branding or whatever of RPGs? Haha, sorry, I got drawing inspiration from Lord of the Rings, the soap opera Dark Shadows, and the fantasy supplement of Chainmail. So,
I have not heard of Chainmail or Dark Shadows, actually.
well, it's old.
Yeah. Uh,
Sorry. Carry on.
no, I don't have any direct experience playing like um RPGs that are directly, you know, created from other universes.
Hmm.
But I know that there's a lot of them. Uh, I mean, the game I'm playing right now, or the RPG I'm playing right now, is called Lancer, which is kind of like a mech sci-fi uh, based universe. Not exactly the rule set of D&D, but every tabletop RPG is kind of an offshoot of Dungeons and Dragons in some way. It's not, there are a lot of different ones, but it's all sort of the same concept of storytelling and universes and character creation and different rule sets is really the main difference. So when you have a direct copy or like direct carryover from a franchise into an RPG, I think um, really the intention behind that is just uh, here's this universe that people enjoy. How can we create something, or here's an attempt to create something where you can build your own character and interact in that universe. And um, I don't want to say pretend because I don't think that's really it exactly, but
It
like
doesn't sound right.
yeah, but like imagine yourself in that world and then inhabit somebody in that world and then share that experience with other people. So there's like the communal element also. But I don't know. I've played a bunch of different tabletop RPGs, but none of them have been like the fan fiction type or like carryovers from universes. But I know that there are a lot of those. And they're also like that's also true for video games. There's a lot of like book or movie to video game adaptations or video games that are based off of various
Oh yeah,
universes.
for sure.
Most obvious one is like Marvel, for example, which is all over the place in the last 20 years.
I was thinking, well, not that. But I realized
I don't know.
I don't actually know what the video game, like what the style of the video game is that I'm thinking of. So I'm going to ask a side question. Um, what are some RPG video games that people might be familiar with?
Oh, there's a
Yeah, I
lot
mean, you
of them.
said Baldur's Gate, which I actually didn't realize was an RPG, which is funny because I knew it was a D&D property.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate is basically Dungeons and Dragons, the video game. But there are many other RPGs. Of most recently, the Witcher
Okay,
franchise.
Witcher is what I was going to bring up, but I wasn't sure if the video game was an RPG or not. It feels like D&D to me. Not the game, because I have no experience with that, but like uh the story.
Yeah, I mean, given that it's like a fantasy setting, there is some similarities there. But they're all like Witcher's also pretty different in a lot of ways too, and I think it's very beloved video game RPG because of the quality, the writing, and the storytelling, and the quests that you go on. Uh, it's most well known for that, where video games often struggle in those areas. Another one, Cyberpunk, is another popular one that's based off of, well, it was a tabletop RPG, an older I think 80s tabletop RPG um, that was created that then video game was based off the tabletop RPG, which has then given become an offshoot for more tabletop RPG iterations based off the video game. So it's kind of like they go hand in hand. But that's a been a really popular one over the last
I
couple.
it's just like had the feeling that that was an RPG, but I had no idea. I've no, other than like Keanu Reeves memes, I have no understanding of that game. So thank you. Keep going.
Yes. What else is there? Another big one is Skyrim and Oblivion and like the Elder Scrolls franchise.
I thought of that, but again, I didn't know it was an RPG. So I guess can you tell me what makes a video game an RPG?
The same concept really that makes Dungeons and Dragons an RPG. So basically, if you're playing a character and you have the opportunity to um, create a character, although Witcher isn't really, you're not really creating a character in Witcher, and you're it's still an RPG. But if you're embodying a character, whether you're creating it or not, in a game world, and you're going on quests in the context of like a larger campaign, and you
So if the story arc is more or less going to be the same,
yeah, and you have the opportunity.
regardless
I
of
mean,
what I do.
yeah, a big RPG point in video games is like, do you have the opportunity to make decisions that change or affect the outcome of how the story plays out? That's like a big tell for RPGs because not all video games, there are a lot of like linear video games where the story just plays out and you play
Okay.
with the confines of the story and you don't have an opportunity to make choices that change what happens. But that's kind of been and that's what I was mentioning earlier with AI, because like, while that hasn't quite happened yet, it's generative AI is going to start being placed in video games. And then once that happens, you're going to get even more choices and opportunities and decisions that affect the outcomes of things that happen. And
No, it's
it's
starting to creep me out like Westworld.
yeah, it's not that I'm advocating for it, but it is unfortunately um, going to be utilized more.
Okay, so I don't know, hopefully folks who also have these questions are familiar with the things I'm gonna say because otherwise this is just a very only I will care about where this goes.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like I not experienced with video games. When I said I've basically never played a game, I meant it. So I'm thinking if my choices affect the outcome. I know that most video games have like a couple of different endings that people look for. Is that regardless of whether or not it's an RPG, is that real?
Yeah, there are some games that aren't RPGs that have different endings, but typically the different endings thing is mostly found in RPG context where, like, for example, um, a really popular game in the last 10 years is Red Dead Redemption 2.
That's what I was thinking of. I was going to ask if that's an RPG.
Yeah, so I bring that up because it's not, I would not characterize that as an RPG. You don't, while you get to
I was
make
almost going to give a spoiler right then
Well, you
about
get
the
to make
ending.
choices to an extent. You're not change. There's no alternate endings. You're not really changing anything that happens in the story. I'd characterize Red Dead as more of like a third person uh, action game with a lot of heavy storytelling elements. But I think when you talk about RPGs specifically, like Witcher has like three different endings and Cyberpunk
Okay.
has like four different endings, and there are like RPGs really are games where you get to carry the story forward in the ways that you want as the character you're playing as, and then that shapes how the game plays out, particularly towards the second half of the game. Red Dead is a game that is still it's big, it's like 60 to 70 hours long, and you definitely do make choices in the game world, but the story is always going to play out the same way. So,
Okay, so I'm gonna ask some like really goofy questions. There's a game that is like really, really, I know it's an RPG because I know it feels like there are infinite options, having not played it for how it'll go. And now I don't know the name of it. So moving on. Um, what's a JRPG?
oh, Japanese RPG is what that stands for, and that has just become its own giant subgenre of RPG, which
Right,
is
I assumed it wouldn't have a name if it wasn't different.
yeah, I mean it's not really it there's still RPGs in the same way that any RPG is an RPG, but it's just the stylization and the way the games are structured are uh, culturally specific to Japan. And so, like, most famous example of that is the Persona series. Typically, people talk about Persona, but there are others. The game of the year last year that came out, it's called Expedition 33, is a
Hmm.
French game that's a play of a JRPG because it's the same kind of style of JRPGs and the way that the gameplay is structured because the gameplay is turn-based, but it's made by a French studio. And they're sort of like doing their own take on what that means. So there's a lot of different iterations, but they're still all RPGs in the sense that you're inhabiting characters in a game world, going through stories, making decisions, changing the outcomes of what happens. It's just different cultures, different styles, different gameplay loops, different rule sets.
Okay, so the plot and structure of a JRPG is just different from what I would expect when if I knew what video games were.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. There's also a lot more focus on like side quests and like doing silly activities, for example, just very like job like often in JRPGs your character will have jobs and like Persona, for example,
You go to school.
go to school and you do like mundane activities as part of the game structure, like outside of the main quest that you're on. And those are more common in JRPGs specifically than they are in Western. Western RPGs have side quests too, but it's like they're just different. They're more JRPGs are often more
Like more
lighthearted.
plot related.
Yeah, yeah. They're JRPGs are more lighthearted in the way that they structure activities and like side content and um, more casual almost. I don't know if that's the right word, but
I think I feel like I should give a little small disclaimer about why I know a few video games very well, having
yeah,
never played them, which is just that I never had a console or games as a kid. And so, as a teen and young adult, when I was around video games, there was no reason or impulse for me to grab a controller. So I've observed a few. Um, there's a Persona game I care about. There's a Red Dead 2 I care about. And then Disco Elysium was the game that I couldn't think of the name of.
that is a good one to bring up, and I don't know why I didn't bring that one up because yeah, it's a very good example of a more Disco Elysium is like become much more well known because of its writing and its narrative, and you're still it's still an RPG because you're still giving the main character various stats and choosing a lot of options through the gameplay and affecting how the story plays out and what
I
happens
feel
to
like
your
there are, like I said before, infinite options for how it could go.
but it's not it's different because it's less focused on the gameplay. Like there's very little in terms of gameplay options or like the way gameplay plays out. And it's much more of a, I don't want to call it like a text-based video game. It's what
There
it's,
it is. When you said pen and paper, I thought text-based.
yeah,
That's what happened in my head.
it's more like point and click adventure style. And it almost feels like you're playing a pen and paper RPG and within the context of it being a video game. but it's like it's more like you're playing through a book that you're writing as you play it, but you're not, but it's less focused on the actual gameplay elements and more focused on narrative decision making. So that's a pretty Disco Elysium is a pretty unique game in that sense. And there's a game that just came out like 2 weeks ago, actually, and I'm really like nerding out now, but it's called Esoteric Ebb, and that's very similar to Disco Elysium, and it's like one of the first games to iterate off that style since, because disco is very like in its own like has it's created its own subgenre basically.
That's awesome. So, okay, so since now I know, I wanted to ask about text-based. I was going to say pen and paper again. Um, I think that I understand what it is, but can you describe what a text-based RPG would be?
Um, so I mean, just in the context of like disco, for example, it's there is like a narrator within the game, and you'll see the words on screen. It's like dictated to you, and you click various options to respond to paragraphs. And a lot of it in Disco's context is going on within your own character's head. And voices in your head, and you're responding to those voices, and you have different choices on how to respond and skills that govern what happens after those responses, basically. So it's almost like there's an element of like you're still playing a video game and you have a character and you're moving around a game world, but it's almost like half book, half video game. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yeah, and it feels to me though like I could do it over email or something. I was gonna say like with a pen pal because I live in pre-internet, I guess. Um, but I'm not wrong, right? Like I could you could write me a narrative and then ask me what my next move is, and we could do that over chat or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, I mean if that is a it would definitely be more free form, but it's almost like if you were doing that, it would be it's almost like you'd be writing a book together, like based on your responses to the other person, or like writing a story less than play. It's more storytelling and story writing and less playing a game or like game playing.
I mean, but isn't that what the games are? You're collaboratively storytelling.
Yeah, yes, I think the difference, I guess the
I think in
easiest.
a video game, right, someone has dictated a finite number of set of options for for the path you could take. But if you're doing a tabletop RPG, or a text-based RPG, like you are collaborating, right? Like maybe you wrote the plot, but I could really mess that up if I choose outside of what you've planned for.
I think it's more the difference is more structured around how much of a focus is there on gameplay, versus narrative. So, like, for example, in The Witcher, you have like a ton of different abilities and spells you can cast and move sets, and there's a lot more button commands, and you're walking around the world and you're like killing monsters with swords, and there's a lot more options in terms of how you play the game. Whereas in Disco, you're just walking around and you're making choices, but a lot of it's taking place through text and narration and less so like what options do I have as my character within the game world? You're still interacting with objects, but you're not, there's no like the gameplay is more focused on taking place within your imagination, I guess, rather than within the context of the actual pixels on the screen. I don't know, that's the best way I could put it, but
No, I'm so delighted by this. I didn't even plan this. I was like, it is all story. I win.
I mean, it
Um,
is. Yeah, all RPGs are storytelling for sure, and you're still collaborating to tell a story regardless of what type of RPG you're playing, but it's just a matter of it's like a spectrum of like how much are we focused on narrative decision making and how much are we focused on like game rules and game structure and playing within the game world and what your character's abilities are.
well, but even if you were just just writing a story. The characters still have to make decisions, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's an element of both regardless. Um, but Disco is just a very unique game in that sense because it's not as focused on it feels more like you are playing through a novel than it feels like you're playing a video game, I guess.
Okay, I'm gonna go in my nerd corner right now, but I don't know your familiarity with Star Trek.
Huh. Not very familiar. I mean, I've seen some of the old Star Trek stuff and I know what it is, and I've watched, I think, one of the new movies, but I don't know a ton about the universe.
Well, it occurs to me, and I've been thinking about this a lot because for whatever reason I'm bothered by it. The holodeck. They often have things called holo novels, which is, I think, like yeah, like an RPG. Like I'm supposed to follow a specific path through the story to get the right ending, but there's nothing stopping me from like kicking the romantic lead or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. Um,
Very creative. The idea I came up with was kicking.
yeah, I don't know a lot about the Star Trek universe, or I mean, I don't know if it's like I don't know much about the Star Wars universe either, but I don't know if those are like,
They're very, very different.
yeah,
As
that's
far
fair.
as I know, there is no holodeck in Star Wars. I mean, I've seen all the movies, but like nothing beyond the movies.
Not in the same way. Yeah.
Um, which actually brings me to a great regular board game connection, which is a okay. I don't know the words for board games either. But I yesterday played one that is based. It's like it's like skinned as Star Wars. You have like you're in that universe. Um, and I think it would be called campaign based, but like that's pre-written and then you do the game on a board.
Yeah,
Uh,
they've definitely started. I mean, I've played several of those. I think I might have even played the game you're talking about once, um, or something similar to it. But it's a relatively new phenomenon where they're starting to uh, make like create board games that have campaigns where you play the board game several times and it changes each time you play based on what you did the last time you played it with people. Um, so like for one example, I had a several month long campaign with friends where we played through Ticket to Ride even did this where they like
like a
Ticket to
legacy game.
yeah, Ticket to Ride's a pretty classic board game, but they turned it into Ticket to Ride Legacy where you play like I think we played like 10 or 15 times total, and the game world changed and expanded every time you played, and there's like a winner at the end of all of the times you play, and yeah, they sort of like board games are starting to do this thing where they're changing the base board game and then turning it into like a longer story or like trying to make it a story as you
Mhm.
play more times. So it's really I don't know, bleeding into other mediums, not just video games and tabletop. I mean, I guess board games are tabletop, but not.
Well, I'm wondering if, and this isn't like we don't have to know the answer to this, but I wonder if like I don't know a lot of people who hang out for 4 hours on a Saturday to play Sorry, right? Or Monopoly. So I wonder if that story element is what compels people or brings them back.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I mean, I play a fair amount of board games too, and I think the best board games are often the ones where it feels like you're creating a story that's different every time you play. Um, So like for example, my favorite board game is Twilight Imperium, which is, I mean, it's like a 10-hour long board game and
That's why I left.
yeah, people don't play it very often and it's obviously really hard to get enough people to play that game because it takes an entire day, but that's what that game does is it feels like you're sort of playing through a mini story every time you play and it's different each time.
Well, I understand it also has like this is not relevant. A lot of jargon and like moving parts and iconography that you have to know.
Yeah, it's very complicated as far as board games go. It's not a board game I would just like recommend to people who don't play board games, but
Um,
that's what makes it fun is like all of the options.
that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. We did get through most of the things I was going to ask. I'm going to ask one more question, which is if you're preparing a campaign, if you are the DM, um, what does that look like? What do you do to prepare? And what does your, I guess, writing process look like?
You read through there was a Dungeon Master's manual basically that you have when you start a campaign and you read through a lot of that and it sort of guides you as to each scenario and like which things you can do and which what to throw at your players and how to respond to what they do. There's an element of freedom in that, but it's preparation is mostly through reading through the manual of whatever campaign you're running, and then also you have the freedom of creating or changing NPCs and um, scenarios, whether that's battles or like conversations that characters and players have with people in the game world that you're facilitating. Um, so it's not, you have to learn all of the rule, like it's a lot of rules learning and understanding everything so that you can, because your players are going to ask a lot of questions, right? So you have to like answer, be able to answer what they're asking, but then it's also understanding whatever scenario you're putting them in and then being able there is an element of like thinking on the fly too because you don't know what they're going to want to do so then you have to respond to what they're whatever they say and then sometimes you have to go off the script of the book and then so it requires knowing the game really well knowing whatever the campaign you're playing is really well and then the elements of creativity and freedom come in both NPC creation and also map creation and also you're getting your own rule sets for whatever enemies you throw at them, at least in the context of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of like I would relate it to, like, for example, if you're playing The Witcher, rather than being Geralt in The Witcher and like playing through the game as Geralt, you're the person who's like the omniscient like overhead narrator that doesn't exist that's creating all of the side quests and the main quest and the NPCs and then like guiding Geralt onto whatever tasks and missions and so it's sort of like the omnipresent non-existent voice that creates the world in which Geralt inhabits, and that's sort of a similar thing as to what you're doing in a tabletop context.
Well, okay, so how do you write that? Like session one, you bring folks together because you wrote something and they are prepared to respond with a character. What is that? How do you write like that? How do you write open-ended? Like where when you sit down, do you write the whole thing or
Oh, it's all
do you
listed
leave
in.
spaces for them to respond?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, it's a lot of that is all like in the books you're gonna buy to run a campaign, whatever you're doing. Unless you're, I mean, I have a friend who's like created his own game worlds and RPGs, all like that, like he's made them up firsthand, and that takes a lot of time, and like that's a whole different animal because you're creating an entire rule set and game world. When you're running like a D&D campaign, for example, you're going off of a book that has the scenario written for you. So you're not really pre-writing anything unless you're wanting to add things to it or change around the NPCs or like writing notes for yourself. Um, but it's more like on the fly type responding rather than like pre-writing because oftentimes if you're playing within a world that has preset rules, then you're just guiding players through pre-made campaigns that somebody else has written, but it just depends on how much. I mean, like the freedom with that is highly variable based on what you want to do. And if you want examples of what that looks like, the D&D's been very popularized in a YouTube series called Critical Role, and so that's like a way to both watch what D&D looks like and see what DMs do. And I feel like that's why it's been become more popularized again over the last 5 years is that I don't know, YouTube podcast series, whatever you want to call it, has brought a lot more viewership and attention.
Um, well then how do you, if you were a player then responding to a story, so presumably as the player, I'm not going to look up the story,
Yeah.
um, because then it's not a surprise and it sounds like cheating. How do you prepare? How do you prepare? You just you're like, I hope that this character works for any situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's you'll go over, oftentimes there will be a session zero where you have character creation and the players that will tell you what their characters are and their backstories that they come up with. And then you sort of like piece it together within the game world and you can change things around based on now that you know more about the characters who are playing the game, then you can sort of fit them into what the campaign is. So you're never going to just like sit at a table for the first time playing D&D and have people make characters and then you just like jump into the thing. Like there is some element of like people make their characters, then you kind of have an understanding of what's going on, and then you can place them within the game world in a way that makes sense, I guess.
Do you then choose a campaign based on the characters, or is that already planned?
It's already planned. But you can, there is like sometimes, for example, somebody will make a character that has a backstory of, say, like, oh, somebody killed my character's wife, for example. And then as a DM, you would say, well, okay, I'll like put in the scenario at some point where you develop an NPC and you put him in the game world where like that character is now like seeking revenge. This is a really basic example, but that character is now seeking revenge on the person that killed their wife. So then you, as the DM, put the person who killed their wife in the game world at some point, and they run across them, and then so you're writing that character into the game world, and then you're giving them a scenario to play through where their character is being developed because they run into the person in some way that has killed their wife in the past, and then maybe they have to battle them or like solve puzzles to figure out where they are or whatever. So it's like there's an element of shifting the world around and putting adding and subtracting things after each session basically. So there is like some, I guess there's the prep goes into after every session based on things that your players choose, then you go from there.
Um, would something like that tend to be part of, would that be a side quest or like a main, like part of the main plot?
Usually side quest stuff because like the main plot's already pretty set out, so it's just depending on like how much involvement you want to give players in um their own personal development, but most of that stuff's going to be like side content that comes along as you go through a main quest or a main campaign.
So it should hmm, push the plot forward regardless, though.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Ideally.
I like saying plot. It made me feel like I was making that connection again.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I know that I turned that one question into four, but is there anything you think I should have asked that I didn't? Anything you want to add? Um, anything folks should know um, about your work?
Um, I don't think so. I have started a business that's very in its fledgling stages with a couple of um coworkers from an old job that is called Adventure Arena, and we're basically doing what we've talked about here online for running role-playing groups and trading card games and other basically games for kids and teens on the spectrum to like build social skills, but it's all online rather than in person. So that's the focus right now. And I've done a lot of that in-person group settings and summer camps um, in the past through various organizations. Um, but I think really I would challenge people because I know that there are some people that are either like really into RPGs and storytelling and playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever video games, and there are people who just don't interact with any of that kind of stuff. And so I would challenge people to give it a shot if they haven't, just because I think it's a good opportunity to um, interact with a different kind of space. Like say you're somebody that just like reads books or watches TV shows or movies, but doesn't really play games. I think it challenges a different part of your brain that still interacts with creativity and storytelling. And I think there's a lot of value in inhabiting somebody else that has different experiences than your own life because it can teach you things about other people or help you reflect on what's going on in your own life or help you figure out how to tackle situations in ways that you may not have otherwise thought of. Um, so I think RPGs present a really distinct and interesting way to tell stories in an interactive medium that isn't really present in books or movies. So and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for, um, it's definitely become a space for kids and teens that needs to work on social skills or that want to develop social skills through like play therapy. And so I think there's been a lot of science that's been done about that over the last several years where it's now become like acceptable in the scientific community to be like, okay, Dungeons and Dragons is actually helpful or role-playing games are actually helpful certain people to develop those skills. So
That's awesome. Thank you. Um, I like want to ask more questions, but we have gone over an hour. And I can just ask you later. So, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope folks learned at least as much as I did here today. I'm excited to um in my fantasy world hear lots of people engaging with role play after this.
yeah,
Um, thank you so much for hanging out with me, Connor. I'm going to move into updates from the Midwest Writing Center.
yeah,
Um,
thanks for having me.
We've got, as always, first and third Saturday of every month is Writer's Studio, which is our free workshop group, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. We've got an in-person group which meets at the Midwest Writing Center at which is ground floor, Rock Island Public Library, and then we have an online group which meets with me via Zoom. What else do we have going on? We've got some good Write More Light coming up. And uh of course, April is National Poetry Month. So if you are not already watching our National Poetry Month celebration, we are uploading a new video every single day of some awesome poet reading their work. So go ahead and skip over to that playlist now that you're done with this video. We've got poet Jeff Jeffrey McDaniel here for the Spectra Reading Series on April 23rd, which is so incredible. He's a poet who, I mean, his you can look him up, you can read his poems online, watch him perform online, but like we teach from his work. So it's really exciting to have someone whose work that whose writing I've, worked closely with coming through. The Boozy Book Fair is coming up at on May 2nd. So look out for more info on that. We're so grateful to the Macabre Librarian for including us again. I'm rewinding in time because I only look on the right half of my planner pages. But April 30th is the release of the adaptation anthology, which is called A Jump Between Steps. We're really, really excited to see that come to life. It's been kind of a great delight working on that anthology. I know I like the books we publish, but that's because I'm part of the publishing team. So I know that they are good by virtue of being involved. I promise not to be involved in publishing bad books. Uh, that's all I'm going to give you right now. The deadline for applications to the Young Emerging Writers Internship Program and the deadline for submitting work to the Atlas if you are a young writer, 15 to 19 years old, who, for whatever reason, cannot be part of the internship. Submitting to the Atlas is also an option. The deadline for both of those things is May 15th. You can find all the info for that on our website. And the Great River Writers Retreat applications are due May 1st. So if you are looking for, so the Great River Writers Retreat is a fully funded 1 week stay at the Bennett House Retreat Center in Rural Rock Island. For any Midwestern writer, or just one, who applies to that, working on a project already in progress. For that's that's when I take a breath from saying all of that all at once for some reason and leave you with your prompt. As always, there's always the bonus prompt, which is do whatever you want. Please set 5, 10 minutes on your timer, whatever it is you can afford to dedicate to writing today, and write whatever comes. Poem, a journal, a list, fiction, nonfiction, whatever comes out is perfect. I would like you to write something in a classical fantasy setting. Thank you for hanging out with us today, and as always, please write more light into your life.